guest today often refers to amps, plugins, effects, and other players as a beast. Well, he's a true serial killer himself at the guitar. Hailing from Liverpool, but now living in Zermatt in Switzerland. A player who likes easy titles such as Guardian Spirits of the Quantum Multiverse and Cosmic Crypto Quadrillionaires Club. And of all great guitars, he definitely has the lowest voice of them all. A truly spectacular player. Welcome to this episode, Jack Gardiner.
Niels, thank you so much for having me on, man. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm glad we finally managed to make it happen.
Yeah, me too. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah?
Surviving. I think we spoke a little bit earlier about both of us being parents, and at the moment, my main thing is trying to get more than 4 hours sleep a night. This is a bit of a game changer in the sense that there are no children here, but I'm still waking up at 3 a.m.
Ah, yeah, your rhythm has changed.
Absolutely.
I recognize that, but it's an interesting thing becoming a parent, because I can also imagine playing the guitar requires focus.
Yeah.
Right? And specifically the way you do it. Can you tell me something about that process of finding focus while having become a parent?
Still trying to find it, if I'm totally honest, but I think the big thing was in the beginning, it was okay because I could play while I'm in the same room as them, and they're not mobile. You're not having to worry about them killing themselves every few minutes. But now that's a definite issue, and it's something that honestly, I'd love to get back. Now I'm lucky to get 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes a week. In some cases, it's more like I'm playing just to make the work happen. And I'm missing that time myself. I think I always say this is a joke to my wife. I'm always like, I'd love to go away for 2 weeks and practice guitar. It's never going to happen. But I think it's trying to make practice in the sense of when I'm writing, I can explore maybe a concept. Maybe if I don't fully grasp it at that moment, that's how I'm trying to get practice in at the moment. Like a demo track or even my own original music. That's now practice for me. It's not necessarily spending time with the instrument, playing over changes or, improvisation. That just doesn't happen anymore.
But is that difficult, or do you really realize, okay, they're young, right? So this is a phase, and then can you tell me something about that?
I'd like to think that's the way, and I'm hoping that when they get to school, maybe things will ease up a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it's just my son, and neither of them slept at all through the night. Yeah. My daughter was the same, and just as she was starting to sleep right the way through the night, the second one came. That was.
Oh man, I recognize this, man.
Exactly. But you have two as well, right?
Yeah. And everything changes, but it's what I find is it's difficult finding the focus. But in some way, I try to become more efficient when I do have the time. Right? You recognize that?
Definitely. For me, I'm always one of these guys as well. When I have a deadline for something, that's when I tend to do the best work. If I don't, no, I find it really difficult to stay focused on whatever the goal is that I'm working towards. I've been saying for a year about doing a solo album.
Oh yeah.
And, this was from January 2023, and I've been promising people, I'll have something together by March, April, and it never happened. Now that he's one, I've said to myself, I need to have everything written by end of October, and then we're going to start releasing in January. And
I'll give you a call, man.
Yes,
to check.
Yes, please do. I need something like that to push me.
And okay. I'd like to talk with you how you ended up in Switzerland with 2 kids and a wife.
Crazy story. I mean, I basically met my wife. She came to a gig of mine in Liverpool, and she was traveling for work, so she was often in Liverpool or London. We ended up moving in together, and then around the same time, I lost my main job at the time. Basically, was session work and covers gigs. They were paying the bills. I wasn't really focusing on the online world really, or any of the stuff which I wanted to do for myself. There were certain guys in the Liverpool scene who were very much YouTube guys, they're just bedroom players, or, you know, doing this flashy stuff. That's just for bedroom players. And as a young, impressionable guitarist, when you're looking up to some of these guys who have been successful, you're like, maybe they're right, you know, like maybe I shouldn't focus on that. And then I lost, I think it was 3 residencies in the space of 2 days when I was visiting my now wife in Switzerland. And I was panicking, thinking, what am I going to do financially? This is like a big drop in income. And I always remember her laughing at me, saying, like, move here and focus on the other stuff and you'll be fine. Yeah. And I was like, how? It's impossible. I've left YouTube for years now. I haven't really kept up. And she was like, I promise you, give it a year or 2 and you'll thank me if you come. There was that, and there was also Brexit, which happened. So the whole touring thing, I was thinking, how am I going to go on tour in Europe? Like, there's nothing. I think even till this day, they haven't agreed anything with Europe in terms of travel. So I decided just before 2020, it was like the November, I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's give it a go. I was traveling November, December, January, February, and I landed the day we went into lockdown. I'll never forget that. That was like, it was lucky I still didn't have my permit at that point either. So if it had been a couple of days later, I don't think Switzerland would have let me in and we would have been separated. But I got there and lo and behold, she was right. I started to do the YouTube stuff. I started to write the original music. And it just like switched my mindset. I was like, okay, this is what I've been craving for years, to explore guitar in the way which I want to try and write music, to try and, you know, focus on all the things that got me into guitar in the first place, watching Steve Vai, watching, you know, all these players, Guthrie. And so, yeah, it ended up being, I think, the best move I've ever made. You know, I think I would have still been in this gigging scene of sessions, but you're not really making a great living necessarily. You're just surviving. So all of a sudden it's like, I can pick and choose which gigs I have to play now. I don't have to say yes to everything anymore, you know.
But it's interesting that it required a different place for you to get that.
Yeah, I think as well, like, I was so sucked into that scene in Liverpool where, I mean, there's a negativity there as well, as in, like, everyone wants to go out all the time. Everyone wants to go to the pub afterwards and have a beer. That's a very UK British drinking culture thing. And it's not like I was drinking all the time, but I would spend nights where it would be like 3 a.m. I'd finish the gig at midnight, but then I wouldn't get back until 4. You wake up late, and then do you want to really practice the tunes or covers tunes or things like that? It just wasn't inspiring, you know, in that same way. And I'll never forget, there was a guy from Liverpool who was in a band called the Cheap Seats. They were like a 90s country band. He'd been really successful in America. And he'd taken me aside when I was like 19 one day, and he was like, you need to get out of Liverpool if you want to do what you really want to do. He was like, Liverpool's amazing, but he was like, it's a trap. He was like, you need to go and see somewhere else in the world. He was like, I guarantee if you move away, you'll achieve the things you want.
The Beatles went to Rishikesh.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's what made them. You know.
Yeah, in a sense.
Yeah.
Or to Hamburg, actually.
Hamburg also was the big one, wasn't it? Yeah. And I mean, I think Liverpool, although we have the Beatles and we have loads of bands from the 80s who did well, the modern scene doesn't encourage original music in any way, shape or form. It's just purely covers because of that kind of, you know, Beatles heritage. We used to play the Cavern. We had a residency there every Friday. And it was like, you had to play Beatles songs. You know, and you think but there's a venue which is incredible. I've played there with China Crisis, who are like an 80s band, but they don't encourage newer original acts. It's just the kind of legacy stuff. They'll happily put on covers bands every night.
But then there's covers, then there's original music, and then there's the kind of music you love to play, right? Which is very much of a niche.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. There's no chance of that in Liverpool. I don't even think we have that many guitar players in Liverpool in that kind of style, you know.
If you start playing guitar, you'll play some chords and maybe some scales. But at one point you must have noticed, like, okay, there's so much more. Can you remember the time in your life when you kind of discovered that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to go probably right the way back to the beginning, because My dad's a bass player, massively into John Patitucci, Chick Corea, all that kind of stuff. That was a side note for my dad. I mean, John Patitucci was his favorite bass player, so I remember him having those VHSs and DVDs on. But he was also into like the Grateful Dead, all the jam.
Oh, that's an interesting combination.
And so my first introduction to when I really knew I wanted to play guitar was when I was like 8 or 9. He had a Zappa Plays Zappa DVD, which was Steve Vai on guitar. Hearing that and turning around to my dad and saying, I want to play guitar like that. You know? My dad never wanted me to go into music, even though he was a bass player.
Oh, wow.
All of his friends were classical musicians, like playing in the Philharmonic orchestras and stuff. And he'd seen that their kids had started when they were like 2, 3, became really good, got to 11 and then quit, you know. So I was begging him for an instrument, and he was like, when you're older, you know. When I finally did get a guitar, it was from my auntie. And all I wanted to learn was Metallica, but Steve Vai was the big one.
Yeah.
I'd kind of like got into the Yngwie thing, Paul Gilbert, all the 80s shredders that my dad wasn't into. You know, he'd never listened to that stuff, but that was YouTube that came around straight after this. And I discovered Guthrie, Tom Quayle, Rick Graham, Martin Miller, all of these guys. And I was like, wow, this is a whole different level. Not to take away from, you know, the idols from the 80s, but it was the improvisation aspect of it that resonated with me. Okay. And that opened the gateway to fusion then.
But at first, what appealed to Steve Vai's playing to you?
The shred stuff a little bit, but it was more the way in which he used harmonics and all that kind of stuff. And as a kid, I think that's what we go for. You know, for me, when I was 11, I remember we did a gig with my dad just in a pub where we played The Crying Machine, which is still one of my favorite songs by Vai.
But I'm intrigued that your father, who is able to play The Crying Machine, which I think then he's a decent player, at least, that he in a way said, no, don't go that path. What do you think about that yourself?
I think this real working class attitude. Like we're from a super poor area in Liverpool called Anfield. And it's this notion of, you know, you need to get a job, you need to work. I didn't think my parents were like that in that sense. I think it was more they wanted me to have security. And my dad had seen, it's a weird story with my dad. He was a bass player. He was in a band until he was like 19. They were getting semi-successful in the UK, but he just didn't like the scene in terms of the drugs that were being taken. It was the 70s, all the drinking. He'd seen a cyclist go past in the park one day on a hangover and was like, what am I doing with my life? I should be doing that, and became a professional racing cyclct. So it's like the weirdest swap over.
Oh, wow, man.
So I think for him, that kind of soured his taste with music a little bit. He still played, you know.
So, but that's interesting about the role of parents. He does that out of protection, right?
Yes, I think so.
Where did you need to dig yourself to overcome that voice? Because that's a big voice in your life, right? The voice of your father. That you thought, no, I do really want to do this.
You know, I'd had the battle. I mean, there's videos from when I'm like 2 or 3 watching Jimi Hendrix with a plastic guitar, and I'm asking for a guitar then. You know, saying like, when can I get a proper guitar? And it was always, no, when you're older. But I think it was when I was like 13, I'd started putting videos up on YouTube. I got like the first endorsement deal or sponsorship when I was 15. And I think when they saw that, they were like, okay, now you can do this. There's a weird backstory. It was like, despite coming from the really, essentially we lived in poverty. That was what we'd be classed as in the UK in terms of what my parents earned. I'd gone to a good school academically. I was always doing well in that sense. They put me on a thing called the Oxbridge program. I don't know if you've heard. It's basically like Oxford and Cambridge. Like they try and get people who are from, like, say, underprivileged backgrounds and help them find a route to there. And my plan was to do like English literature. That was always the thing, and my school had helped push that. So when I got to like 15 and music started, like it started to become almost like a job. I was teaching privately and stuff like that, and gigging.
What age did you say?
15.
That's really young, man.
That was like the thing. I think my dad saw that then as in like, okay, he's committed, he's passionate about it.
And probably also thought, oh, he's kind of making a job out of this.
Yeah, I guess so. But he did say something funny. Even the first time I got invited to NAMM show, this was like a really interesting thing that sticks with me, was I was too young to go alone. Like I needed someone to go. I was 16. And I said, Dad, I've been invited to go, like, do you think you could come with me? Like, have we got money to do that, to go and fly or whatever? And he was like, no, people like us don't go to Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, that's always stuck with me. It's like this real working class attitude of like, no.
But does that make you feel like an outsider sometimes? Or do you think, no, this is where I do belong? Or can you tell me something about that?
It's a bit of a battle, actually. Like, when I come back now from living in Switzerland, which is like very privileged kind of thing.
It's the opposite of Liverpool, perhaps.
Absolutely, I come back and it makes me feel a little bit sad in some ways, because there's things which I see now that I didn't see growing up there, where like people can't afford the food for the week, or, like they're having to go to like a food bank or things like this. And I'm thinking, oh my God, there's me complaining about, the price of chicken in Switzerland. And I'm like, my friends and family sometimes have nothing there. So it's eye-opening. But what I love about Liverpool is we'll all, I don't want to swear, but we all like to...
Oh, swear, man, come on.
We take the piss out of each other. No one can be... When I come back...
That's really decent swearing.
Yeah, I'm not going to be so scouse just yet, but, like they'll come back and they'll be like, oh, who the fuck is this guy? You think you're a big name guitarist now and all this. Like in a loving way, If we go for a meal or something, it's like, oh, Jack's got this now. He lives in Switzerland, It's one of that. And I miss that a little bit. In Switzerland, we don't have this kind of banter or not taking yourself so seriously. Everyone in Switzerland is very prim and proper,
What does that to you? Do you sometimes want to just go swearing in the street?
Yeah? Absolutely, man.
Do it in your playing, man. Canalize it.
Exactly.
Bring it there.
Bring it to that.
Bring in the anger.
Absolutely. My wife goes mad because, like, when I go back, I know that it's going to be 3 days of debauchery as well. Like I'll agree to meet one person and then that turns into 3 nights of catching up with everyone. They all want to take you to the pub. It's like going back to old times in some ways, but I miss, and that's like all my friends, but all of their family as well, that everyone gets together in the pub and everyone kind of shares their stories, and they don't treat anyone differently. It doesn't matter whether you're like a high-stated businessman or whatever, or whether you're just literally a bin man in Liverpool. Everyone is treated like an equal, and that's what I love and miss.
Reminds me a little bit of these videos of Paul McCartney revisiting Liverpool.
Yeah.
And then they don't think like, oh, but it's like, oh.
Yeah. They're never going to be like, I mean... Even my dad, my dad is super support and he's super proud. He tells people stories that he's just made up most of the time, as in, oh, Jack was doing this. And I'm like, Dad, I wasn't. I really, really wasn't. But they'll never really tell you it to your face. There's always a bit of a banter thrown in there. My dad has a great story about this. Like when he was a cyclist, he thought his dad didn't care that he was a, racing cyclist. He said his dad would never talk to him about it. He'd be like, oh, are you on that stupid bike again and all this. And he came back one day and he came second in a race. And he was like, Dad, oh my God, I came second. And he was like, well, that wasn't first, was it? I was like, better go practice. And he said it was years later he'd collected all of the, press stuff and all of that he just never told them about. Like he was apparently super proud telling all of his friends. But I think it's this like Liverpool thing of we don't care, like everyone's a human. We are proud, but we're never going to be like, oh, you're...
Yeah, but it can be a thin line though to if you overdo that, you can make somebody insecure, right? I mean, did that happen sometimes with you as well from that attitude?
Absolutely. And there is bitterness. Don't get me wrong. There is some people who are doing this in a very serious way, but they pass it off as if it's banter as well. And that's not cool. Mm-hmm. Like, I know, I hear even stories now of like some of the session players that I used to play with back there. I won't name any names, but they'd be
always like no.
They'd be telling people like, oh, Jack, I don't know what he's doing. Like, he's a good player and stuff, but like he's just a bedroom player, isn't he? And you're like, what? We play gigs together? Where has this come from? And they were like the same guys when COVID hit that were reaching out saying to me, which website do you go to get your Skype students from? And I'm like, guys, that's not how this works. Like, that's years of me trying to build things up. So there's a bit of that, and there has been discouragement along the way. Absolutely, for sure. Even my teacher in school, I remember my physics teacher, we sat at parents' evening with my mum, and he's saying, you're really lacking behind. I was bad. I used to sneak out of the lessons and say I had a guitar lesson to just go and practice. And I didn't care about maths and physics. They were like my two subjects that I hated. And he's saying to my mum, look, he's achieving a top grade, but he should be here more. He should be putting in more effort. He said to me, to my face, guitar, I've heard you play, you sound really good, but he was like, you're never going to have a career in it. He was like, this is what you need to focus on. He was like, guitar's never going to make you any money. You're never going to be stable. He was like, it's a 1 in a million chance. So I think you need to really get your priorities together. And that inspired me. I was like, I really want to come back and be like, screw you, I've done it now kind of thing. Just bizarre.
But it intrigued me that you say I didn't like maths, but because there's a lot of math in the way you play, actually, right?
We only have to count to 7.
I mean, it's feeling, of course, but the way you approach solos, right? It's like there's a lot of counting, for instance, and because there is math, or don't you agree? I mean,
I do, but I like to think in my head I'm only counting to 7. In terms of like intervals or whatever. Like, I was never good at the crazy time signature thing in terms of being able to, and I still struggle with that, when people are talking about like rhythms with inside rhythms, polyrhythmic stuff. That just doesn't compute. I have to feel it. Like, I have to feel where the pulse is. I can play stuff in 13, don't get me wrong, or in these weird things, but I hate seeing the written down explanations of that. With the intervallic way, I get it, as in like we're using numbers for that, but in my head still I'm just thinking the numbers 1 to 7 with 9, 11 and 13 just being the replacements of 2, 4 and 6.
That's some sort of mathematics.
Yeah. But I struggle. I find maths was always my weakest subject, which is interesting because you would think being into fusion and stuff like that it would be interesting, but it was always my weakest subject as well. Like, I couldn't do it. English, literature, language, stuff like that, fine. That was what I loved. But anything to do with maths or science, no. It was just not an interest of mine, Even music theory, before I met Tom Quayle, I hated it. I just didn't get on with it. In a lot of ways, that was because of the way it was taught. It was very classical based and whatnot. It was only when I met Tom that I became obsessed with harmony and theory, and I was like, this all makes sense now, like, I don't need to know what figured bass is, for example, or set.
I was just about to ask about Tom, actually, because how did he enter your life, or you entered his lives?
So that was YouTube. Like, when I was 15, I discovered all of these players. And Tom was one that obviously blew me away. Freak show. I'd reached out to him on a forum, and he was playing a gig in Manchester with a bass player called Adam Nitti. And he'd said, oh man, come down, say hey. Went to the show, ended up, spending the whole day together with him, Rick Graham, and George Marius, another amazing player. And I'd asked about lessons, and he was like, man, just come to mine. I live in Leeds, like we can have a lesson. But he was like, come and hang. He was like, stay over the night. Me and Rick are going to be there. And so that happened. Like, we had like maybe 5 or 6 like formal lessons, but most of the time was just me going over, getting to watch them two jam. They'd encourage me to jam. It was very weird in the sense that we were playing over backing tracks, not with each other. When you're thinking there's 3 guitarists there, and we put on a backing track and just take turns for like 10 minutes each. But me being like, 16-year-old kid. We were drinking wine, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm playing with seeing them do it in 3D as well. That opened so many doors. But Tom, I would say, and Rick, of course, but Tom mainly was like the biggest inspiration for me. Just in those first few lessons, it was like the light bulb went off.
Yeah.
And the whole way I'd been approaching guitar before, to me, I was like, that was wrong. He manages to make the most complex kind of harmonic ideas seem like the simplest thing.
It's so beautiful to listen to, man. It's, yeah.
Yeah. He's, for me, the best teacher I've had in any subject ever.
But is that the thing he taught you, is that theory, but also, is it also character building, so to say? Who are you in life and what do you want to say and such?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It was the inspiration in terms of like who he is as a person. He's super intelligent. He can communicate his ideas extremely well. Like we did loads of trade shows together when I was younger. And just watching how he interacted with people, he's one of the most humble guys on the planet too, despite the fact that he's an insane player. He never puts himself like on a pedestal, which, I mean, most of the guys in our world don't. But if someone could, it would probably be someone like Tom Quayle, like that's what I respected more. He helped me out massively. He knew, I think, my background and my financial situation. So like when I went to uni, he was teaching me how to use a bit of Logic at one point. And I was like, oh, I can't afford a MacBook. And out of nowhere, Tom was like, you can have my old one.
Oh, man.
And you're like, what the hell kind of thing? Like, I was like, dude, are you sure? He was like, you'll need it for your record and stuff. So he was like a second father figure to me in that sense, man. Like, so of course the playing was amazing, but it was just listening to him as a human being and being around him that, he was literally, like I say, a second father figure.
So, but he didn't persuade you to tune up the highest string. He tunes up the E string, right?
Yeah, E and B. So
B as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's now C and F.
Yeah, of course. But he didn't get you to do that.
No, I tried it for 10 minutes and was like, no, screw that, man. And he was like, Jack, don't. Absolutely don't. He was like, I only did it because his teacher used to do it. He was like, I don't recommend it, which is cool, like.
But it's so cool to have a person like that in your life who makes things possible, right? That's basically it.
Absolutely, And I think he, especially those early years, well, when I say early, I've been playing for a while at that point already, but to have that kind of foundation then, it meant that, I mean, I never had lessons with anyone else after that, but it's given me all of that foundation to work on what I want to work on, regardless of where I'm studying. I'm always using his intervallic way of visualizing the fretboard. And it was the biggest game changer for me,
So you teach yourself now as well. Do you have this kind of role with some students as well, that you think, okay, I'm more than just somebody who can explain skills, but a person who can really give a push in life?
That's what I'd like to think, like nowadays I don't teach so many private students. I have like a few on a Sunday if I'm around that I try to keep in contact with. But, I think for a few of them, there's one in particular, a young guy from Liverpool, who he stood out straight away to me as like, when someone's got it, like they've got the right.
Who is he? Because I want to check him out.
His name's Ellis Murphy. He's not really playing any kind of crazy shredding stuff. He's just writing nice pop music now. But he came into a lesson when he was like 11 or 12. And he'd said to me he wanted to play, it was one of the Guns N' Roses solos. And he didn't have the technique. It was clearly obvious at that point. But I could see he had like something, some swagger, as we'd say, in his playing, his attitude and personality. And out of nowhere, like he was like, well, how am I going to practice to do this? And I joked saying, well, you'll have to practice 8 hours a day if you want to do that. It's like, it takes a lot of work, Ellis. Next week, he comes back and he was like, I can play it.
Oh, wow.
And he did. And I was like, what did you do? And he was like, well, you told me I had to practice 8 hours. I was like, I felt terrible, like this poor.
You're happy you didn't say 14, man.
Exactly, Yeah. But he was just like that. He got really into like players like Alan Hines. His granddad used to bring him to lessons all the time. It turned out that my best friend was actually his cousin. We didn't know.
Oh.
So there was like a connection there to small world.
Oh, in the UK, it's one big family.
Exactly. In Liverpool especially, man, we're all Irish. But he, I met him actually the last time I went back to Liverpool randomly in a pub, and he was like, "Jack, I haven't seen you in years, since you've moved to Switzerland." I was asking him how he's getting on. He's in a successful like indie pop band now, like he's doing really well. I was asking him, "Are you still into playing?" And he was like, "I'm not really into like the shredding stuff anymore." He was like, "It's more songwriting, he's singing," but just the way he was talking as like an 18-year-old, I was like, "Man, you've grown up into such a nice person as well," like there was no ego there. There was no kind of, I'm the big bollocks, like, which that's what I'd like to think I could try and pass on to some of these guys via Tom, the way that Tom taught me,
Yeah. Hey, I'd like to go to you actually playing. Although it's always a thrill to listen to you play, man.
I'll pay you later.
What always happens is I start to stumble if I start talking about it. One thing that strikes me is that sometimes your look is into nowhere sometimes, right? Your mouth does a little bit of movement.
Oh, it's constantly going.
So where are you when you're playing, if you understand what I mean? I mean, can you explain a little bit? Because sometimes a lot is happening, and a lot of surprises are happening. So can you elaborate a little bit on that? What happens when you are there?
Like the place which I really want to get to is when I'm not thinking about anything. That's the goal. I know that sounds like I'm a wannabe Zen guy saying something like that, but
is that what you look like if you're Zen?
Like
looking into the horizon and yeah.
It's like I always find I play worse when I'm trying to think about what I want to do. If I can just get into that mode where you're hearing the lines that you want to play, you're hearing directions that you want to go in, that's like the perfect state. You don't want to be thinking, what do I have to play over this chord again? That's the work that should already be there. And I'm not saying it's muscle memory. There's definitely some of that. We play the same lines all the time. All of us. It doesn't matter who we are. We're always repeating vocab. But I think it's like to get to that point where you can fully switch off and just accept what comes out. Like you maybe hear the things before it happens or you don't. But you are not thinking, can I see this scale over this chord right now? Because if you do that, you're in it. That gets done in the practice room. I think when it comes to actually playing, that's when you should know that shit well enough that you don't have to think about it. It's just language at that point. It's like us having a conversation now. We are thinking, but we're not thinking, where does that word go in the middle of the set? Is it in the, it's gone.
But what I always find intriguing that I get that up until a certain speed. Right, I understand if you're like, and there will come a melody. But if there's so much going on, like, how is it that is that really the muscle memory that they're not thinking, but so many interesting things are happening?
I think it's more like I'll think of little things like, I could hear something outside there. Let's try that.
Yeah, I can go to or so, I don't know what.
Yeah, or if I pick out one melody that I feel can repeat. That'll be the thinking process. It's like it comes out and I'm like, I can do that again. Let's just play with it a little bit. I think nowadays as well, this is an interesting like concept I've been thinking. I watched Wayne Krantz. I don't know if you know his playing, New York guy.
Yeah. I
watched him do a masterclass and he was saying very often now when he plays with a band, and he has done this for years, is he gives them a chart with only like 8 bars on it. And he said some guys are like, what? The whole song is only 8 bars and we've got to play for 7 minutes. And he's like, no, this is just kind of a guide. I'm going to play melodic structures and we'll treat the 8 bars as that's when something new happens. And I like that concept of you try and say something musical for a set period of time. You're not thinking of what exactly that's going to be. You let that come out. But then you go, okay, let's introduce the new concept, after, and it feels more like a musical story to me. I think that is one thing I am conscious of, is if I play a phrase or a melody that I like, I'll do it a number of times and repeat to kind of try and build something in a solo. There's other times where it's just like, I call it random bullshit go. It's like, the fast stuff, that to me is like, that's muscle memory. Any of the licks which are crazy, it's like, it's stuff which I've done a million times
of
before.
course, If you do a sweep picking, you're not thinking about every finger. It's impossible, right?
If you do that, you're going to mess it up.
Exactly.
I find actually it's interesting, like things like this, where it's a demo and not a gig, where you're by yourself, like in a masterclass setting or something like that. I find I have to really, really switch off, because otherwise I end up making huge mistakes. I've done it loads of times before where, because I'm thinking of what someone's asked as a question, I'm like, do I have to do that in my playing? And it suffers for it. Whereas if I have to remind myself of like, just switch off and enjoy the music for a second, that for me in a thing like NAMM or Guitar Summit, I find that so difficult. Or masterclasses, I feel it's like I'm not expressing myself in the same way. I'm trying to answer the question of the student or the question of the listener or whatever I think it is that they're thinking. It becomes like pressure. Whereas in a gig, I don't care about that. It's like everyone's there to have a good time. I want to entertain. We want to enjoy it together. I find that way easier. It's a weird thing for me in my mind of like, switch off. Just enjoy it. Stop trying to do it for them kind of thing. Do it for you for a second,
In a way I can relate, because I have a lot of questions here.
Yeah.
But I don't really mind about it. It's just what will happen, right? In the conversation, But I'd like to go back to the beginning.
Yes.
To the 3-year-old. Did he ask you already for a guitar or not? Because you asked your dad.
My daughter. So she.
Oh, she. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. So my daughter's the 3-year-old. My son's 1. I would always take her into the studio with the MIDI keyboard, and she did ask for a guitar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. My daughter, we bought her this keyboard which came with a microphone. And the first thing she did when she got it, we were like, "Can you sing something, Eva?" And she started going, and I was like, "Is she okay? Like, what's up?" And she was like, down the mic. And I was like, "What is this?" I had forgotten she's obsessed with a band called Ginger. Do you know them? The heavy metal band from Ukraine. She loves the singer. And so she's there.
It's a female singer, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that was what she was emulating. The first thing, she's like, down the mic. I was like, oh my God, is she okay?
A grunting 3-year-old. That's great, man.
But she asked for a guitar for Christmas, which it was a pain to find in Switzerland, like a half-size guitar. Got her it. And then she was like, when we gave it to her, she's like, "Yeah, Father Christmas has brought me one that's too big. I can't play this better. I think this is for you." I was like, "You are kidding." She's never touched it.
Oh, wow.
Since then.
Oh, yeah.
She likes music, but she's never shown a huge interest. And I don't really want to push that. Whereas my son, who's 1, he is straight over to the guitar.
Yeah,
all the time. If I leave it out, I've got to be so careful, because he's. There was a video we caught of him. We could hear my daughter's acoustic guitar in her room one day, and I was thinking, it's not Eva. She's not in there. And I walked in, and it was like, he'd just seen a ghost, because he was there just plucking the strings for about 10 minutes by himself.
That's great,
which is like, maybe he'll be into it, but if he wants to, or my daughter wants to, I want to give them that opportunity that my dad didn't want me to do. I'm like, I'll encourage, and I would never pressure them, but I'd be like, if you want to try it, of course, we can do it. It's like, you have the guitar there. If you want to learn, we can do it together. But I'm not going to come over and be like, you have to practice.
Yeah, but it's a balance of like, you want to be there, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's funny, what you just told me reminds me of, I showed a clip of Mike Dawes to my son.
Oh, yeah.
And then he's 4, and then he was 3. The next day, he grabs this acoustic guitar, and he's just banging it and smashing it. Now he thinks he should just smash the guitar. That's what he's thinking.
You must have had a heart attack. Oh my God.
Yeah, but no, all good, you know. It wasn't expensive, it was a cheapie. So,
Right.
hey, Jack, I'll give you a call in October.
Yeah.
And to
make sure that it's done. Let's see. I'm getting emails all this weekend, actually, of like, now I'm waiting on, like, for this one, I wanted to use lots of different special guests, which is cool. But then you realize that you've got to play the waiting game of, are they ready? You know, and as well, it's pressure on me to go, if someone says, when's the deadline?
Can you mention names or not yet?
I can mention a couple. So, one, no, I can't mention that one. Sorry, I don't want to spill the bean. There is one which is, there's a cello player who plays with Hans Zimmer called Mariko Muranaka. She's a Japanese girl, incredible. There's a really cool like cover / arrangement that I've made of a Japanese piano player, Hiromi Uehara, one of her pieces. We're just doing that as a collaboration together. There is at least one song, we don't know if it's going to be more, with the bass player, which I play with, Riccardo Oliver from Sicily, and a drummer called Gianluca Pellerito. If you know Matteo Mancuso, the same two guys.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
They're going to be on at least one of the tracks.
Great.
And then the rest I have to keep secret.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll hope you'll find your way in it. I'm sure you will. But
Oh man, thanks.
Thanks so much for your time, Jack,
Deals.
and for this conversation.
Well, honestly, it's a pleasure, dude.
Thank you, man.
Thank you for having me on.
And listeners also, thanks for listening.
Major thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to a Scouser. You know, it's one of them. We're not usually allowed in places like this.